I think it's going to be, you're going to see this, AI versus AI until the T-1000 shows up and kicks your door in and we all, are fighting for our lives. Well, what's happened over the last 10 years is that the methodologies that were 10 years ago an advanced persistent threat only capability because of the complexity, the cost, the types of experts you needed have all been commoditized in the cyber criminal space.
Once I extract my data or delete my data, you'll remove it from your servers. The problem with the AI that I see that if they have used your data to train an AI model, then you cannot kind of reverse it unless and until you destroy that model.
There are cyber criminal markets, there's cyber criminal specialties and service providers that have come out. And so now you're seeing attacks that are being conducted by people with relatively limited in-house resources.
This is Omer, and I am a host at BetterTech. The BetterTech is famous for its technology and related podcasts. It's good to have you here with us. And before we kick this off, how about you take a little bit of time and help us know yourself a little bit better?
Sure. So my name's Keith Turpin, and I am the Chief Information Security Officer for the Friedkin Group, which is a consortium of a lot of different companies in a lot of different industries. We're based out of Houston, Texas. Prior to this, I was a Chief Information Security Officer for an aviation services company in Houston. And then prior to that, I spent about 18 years working in various roles at the Boeing company. So I have a lot of aviation transportation background that I've done. And then apart from that, I've been involved in a lot of security industry groups and activities over the course of my career, trained a lot of people, built a lot of teams. So this is kind of something I've been in for a long time.
Wonderful. And I mean, I can see in on your profile and your experience in working with those big companies and a rich vein of experience getting there. So, I mean, before getting into more specific details, as a CISO, someone who is in the leadership role at the security security side of the things for such a long time, how have you seen security landscape changed over the last decade or so?
Probably one of the biggest changes, especially the last decade, this is a great example, is if you went back 10 years to 2013, 2014, there was a lot of talk about these advanced persistent threat attacks that were being conducted by nation-state actors with significant resources. And the types of attacks that they were conducting were complicated, resource-intensive, required a high degree of specialization. And so you would see those attacks only in the context of an advanced persistent threat conducting them. Well, what's happened over the last 10 years is that the methodologies that were 10 years ago an advanced persistent threat only capability because of the complexity, the cost, the types of experts you needed have all been commoditized in the cyber criminal space. Now, there are cyber criminal markets, there's cyber criminal specialties and service providers that have come out. And so now you're seeing attacks that are being conducted by people with relatively limited in-house resources, but who can engage specialty service providers in the criminal marketplace to conduct the same types of attacks that would have required a nation state are now, we're seeing kind of at a much more common attack level. This, once somebody gets a foothold or gets a chance to interact with your environment or your users, the types of attacks we're seeing are now commoditized. So I think the bar has dropped for the attackers in how difficult it is for them to use advanced techniques. And at the same time, from a defender standpoint, that means that a lot of defenses that were considered, only government agencies and the finance institutions were really doing those types of things in 2010, those are now ground stakes for any company that's serious about trying to protect themselves from a breach or a cybersecurity event. And you just see it. Even companies that are putting strong investments into their programs are still struggling to keep themselves safe against the fact that these cyber criminals now can bring so many advanced technologies and techniques to the foreground at such a low cost to them compared to what it would have been a decade ago.
So essentially, it's potentially no different than the supercomputer of the past are really now in the hands of everyone. We call them
Right,
mobile,
right.
but yeah. But as I say, and very similarly, the kind of infrastructure and the sophistication needed, uh, probably a couple of decades ago, that only a handful of people possess now. Kind of, I mean, uh, or not to say ordinary, but a kind of very easily it's commoditized, as you have put that way. So I would imagine that as the attacks have commoditized, so is kind of potentially the defense as well, or is it not the case? Because now a lot of when it comes to application security, there is a lot of security that is built into the frameworks in terms of infrastructure security. There are specialized infras for that, and so on and so forth. So the attack level also needs to get sophisticated with time, or is it not the case?
I, so I think that if you see more, a lot of the defenses, a lot of the core things you do to defend your environment are not about having the best tool.
Hmm.
And this is something there's certainly excellent tools out there that help us defend our environment, and there are core components of building a solid defense. So I don't want to say that tools aren't important, but a lot of the things that when something goes really south, in a lot of breaches, like if you look over the last couple of years and you look at some of the big breaches that have gone public and what happened in those scenarios, in a lot of cases, the things that went wrong were about processes. They
Hmm.
weren't about the specific technology. They were, especially once you're talking about someone who's flying low and slow in an environment, they've gained some level of access, a beachhead, and now they're trying to propagate uh, that level of access. They're trying to capture uh, additional identification. They're trying to escalate their privileges in an environment. The same fundamental steps that you see used today on some of the breaches that have happened in the last 6 months are fundamentally the same techniques that people were using 10 years ago to do
Hmm.
this, right? That because what they're relying on it is inside of any environment, large corporate environment, or even mid-sized business environment, there's a lot of traffic on the network. There's a lot of traffic going over your email systems. And it's still difficult to find a really good impersonation attempt to catch a really careful lateral movement attempt in your
Hmm.
environment. Those are still difficult to catch, even with the tools being better today. And then if you combine that with things like setting up security around things like your domain controllers, which a lot of companies have in their environment, and control the identity of the systems and the people in their environment, the implementing the types of controls that are required to truly lock down domain controllers, to truly lock down your privileged accounts are painful. And so
Hmm.
companies pursue that a lot of times out of regulatory obligation or out of extreme concern for attack. But if you're not in one of those two scenarios, a lot of companies know what they need to do, but they choose not to do it because it's onerous to do, either because of the difficulty or because of the impact that it could have to business. Because one of the things to keep in mind is that for 95% of the companies out there, unless you're in the security industry, you're not in the security business. You're in the business of
Right.
selling something or selling a service or providing something to somebody. Security is simply a insurance mechanism to ensure that you're able to continue to deliver your services, to deliver your product that is actually how your company makes money and pays salaries and pays taxes and all of those things, right? So investing in securities is really about an investment to ensure your capability does not get disrupted.
So, I mean, it's an interesting point that you put in. I would say that investing in security could be because of couple of reasons. One is that which you have really put that is the continuation of your service or a product delivery on an ongoing basis to your customers. So it doesn't get denied or something like that. And but as soon as you move into healthcare, fintech, and other areas. And data also become very important because you can still carry on to keep providing services to your customer, but I mean, your data is probably as important as the service or product itself, and that's where big breaches happen. And while you answer that, I mean, how the emergence of cloud and now the AI, in a way, big tech owns the AI. So essentially, the kind of GPU power and everything that you need to know, you need to have to do anything meaningful that is outside your domain or your premises. How you see this landscape is generally shifting?
That's an interesting question. So what you brought up about data loss and data breaches, those are certainly considerations. And from a business standpoint, like outside of the security standpoint, like how do I protect that data is what's driving you to protect it. And typically there are three things that are driving you. One is regulatory compliance. So whether you're talking about HIPAA or GDPR or CPA, whatever it is, there's a compliance component. The FTC, for instance, is saying you have to do something. So there's a compliance aspect. There's a legal fiduciary responsibility where your customers can now come back and individually do a class action lawsuit because if they can show that you were irresponsible in the protection of their data. And those things all come into consideration as part of how do you ensure that the business continues to operate. Like if you're being penalized by the government, what's the impact to your business? If your customers are suing you, not only what's the impact of the lawsuit, but does that impact your ability to continue to do business because of trust? You've lost trust, right? So all those things go into play. In the cloud space, that was one of your questions, because interesting, because I when I'm talking to people about AI, I often provide an analogy back to when cloud technology was new. Right. So in boardrooms all over and in leadership teams all over the country right now are conversations about, do we trust AI? How should we use AI? What's going to happen to our data if we give it to an AI engine? And those same conversations were happening, 7 or 8 years ago about the cloud. Right. They said, how can we trust that we move our stuff into AWS or we move our stuff into Azure or we move it into this SaaS service? We've always done this from the data center. We've always had full control. From a cloud technology perspective, it's important when people say that, we've always had full control. Like, hey, we've had application A in-house for, 20 years. We've always done it in-house. Going to the cloud on a SaaS service seems so much more dangerous. A lot of times when people say that, it means that they don't actually understand how their own implementation is being done insecurely. And I would argue that a lot of cloud services or cloud environments are more secure than data center environments, unless those data center environments have extremely good security practices, because the cloud providers are trying to sell cloud services to healthcare industry that have to comply to HIPAA, to government agencies who have stringent NIST requirements, to all these other to providers in Europe who care about GDPR. So they're by default building in controls that are probably surpassing those that your individual business has. And that's something to consider when you're talking about the cloud space, right? That in many cases, cloud entities are more secure. Now, are they also a bigger target? Does that mean that, like, if someone can figure out how to get in there, that maybe they get at multiple business data? Is that something they have to be concerned about? Sure. But they're probably also taking it more seriously than many companies are taking.
They're kind of center of excellence. I mean, if you will, you build a center of excellence. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So I think in a lot of cases nowadays, maybe not at the beginning of the cloud journey, but nowadays, I think what you'll find is many of the cloud services are probably more secure than what you have in your own data center, just because you don't have the same concerns. You're not trying to sell to as broad of audience. You aren't building that center of excellence to the same level as some of the cloud providers. Now, AI is an interesting subject. So I think that there are a lot of fears at AI, and you're hearing a lot of concerns that echo what I heard with the cloud, but there are some important differences. So in the security industry in particular, AI is going to turn the attack space on its head a little bit in the future. It's going to have, like, as I said earlier, if we go back a decade, the attacks we're seeing now are similar to the advanced persistent threat attacks we saw a decade ago, but they've been commoditized. the more advanced attacks we're seeing today are going to become even further commoditized by the ability to integrate AI technologies into the attack space. And the simple ability to gather data in an environment and conduct complex analysis at speed is going to change the attack framework. Like right now, even though there are good tools out there, if you want to go after a target, a company, for instance, and you're a bad guy, you might have a commodity front end attack, a phishing attack or something else where, it's kind of you're hitting a bunch of targets and you kind of see where it lands, right? Or you might even try spear phishing where it's a very targeted attack against a group of individuals in a company hoping to get your foothold. Or you might go after a vulnerability that they have on their perimeter. And so that gets you your foothold, right? There's always a foothold that you have to get.
Yeah.
But once you get in there, most of the really big attacks require somebody with a lot of expert knowledge who can then run the tools under the radar, who knows what to look for, where to look for it, and how to gather it in order to escalate privileges and move laterally across an environment. Right now, that requires someone very skilled. There aren't that many people. There's more than there were 10 years ago, but there's still not that many. The techniques aren't necessarily a secret that people can't find out. But it just takes a lot of knowledge to do that and do it carefully enough not to be noticed. That expertise is going to be leveraged in AI. And not only do I think we're going to see that replicated in an artificial intelligence attack framework, I think it's going to be way faster. And so that means that on the defense side, we're going to have to be faster. Our suppliers in the security space are going to have to be using AI on their side to detect other AIs. It's going to become an AI on AI situation in a few years in the cyberspace, because the types of things you need to do as an attacker can be automated if the automation engine can do rational analysis about what it's seeing and when it needs to change. And so I think you're going to see this, AI versus AI until the T-1000 shows up and kicks your door in and we all, are fighting for our lives. But, I don't think it's going to get to that point. But I do think that in the cybersecurity space, we're going to see a lot more AI coming into play on both sides. And in the non-AI, in the outside the security space, AI does represent a potential risk. But one of the things I think people are overplaying is how AI is so much different than another SaaS provided service. And I would argue it's not. Like if I go to a big SaaS provider and I'm going to have them manage my HR data for my company, right? I'm not going to name any providers, but there's big ones out there, right? And you're putting all of your employee payroll data and all of their medical information, you're putting them in this healthcare service or this employee management system that's in the cloud, and you're trusting them with that data. Now, if they employ an AI engine, is that riskier than if they didn't employ our AI engines? They still have people, and those people are touching that data and they're doing things in that data and they're storing that data someplace. The fact that AI is now touching it and moving it around and doing stuff with it, that really comes down to, do you have the right contracts in place? Do you have the right contracts to say you can't
I guess,
use our data to train an engine, right?
I was coming to that. So I think the fundamental difference, the way I say it, that initially, if you take a look at the cloud, then it's largely an infrastructure that you may want to secure. When you get to SaaS, now you have an infrastructure and a software, and the software has data. And as you put it, it may have your sales records, it may have your customer data. But I mean, you can still have a contract that once I extract my data or delete my data, you'll remove it from your servers. The problem with the AI that I see, that if they have used your data to train an AI model, then you cannot kind of reverse it unless and until you destroy that model, because we do not know how these model works and how these models train and how these models then evolve from one place to another. So I think that's something that to me seems a little different if they eventually use your data to train a model, because then you cannot kind of reverse it in one way.
This is where you're going to have to rely on contracts right?
Yeah.
And that's from a control perspective, that's a somewhat weak control, because if the contract gets violated, now the way you're addressing that is it doesn't stop what happened. Now you're dealing with it in court, right? But you can approach the use of AI as a corporation. If you decide you want to use some of these AI tools, whether it's Microsoft's tool or whether it's ChatGPT or whether it's Google's tool, and you want to use these tools, my recommendation is don't have people using the free version or the consumer version. Get a
Right.
contract in place, get an agreement in place, make sure that you have the right language about the use of your data in training engines or not training engines, and how your data can be disclosed to other parties. From that perspective, what's needed is usually an addendum or additional language that talks about the training component or the
Yeah.
sharing component, or if that company is creating data lakes, I mean, data lakes are not new. Like, there's been
Yeah.
data repositories have been out there for a long time. There
Correct.
are providers who've grabbed data from different companies and thrown it in and then done statistical training on it. It wasn't really AI so much, but
Right.
early on, expert systems and those kind of things where they're trying to just identify patterns in the data, patterns in customer behavior, whatever. Those things have been going on for a long time. So I think AI puts some twist on that, but it's a lot of what AI does is already being done. It was being done manually before, and now we're talking about having something replace that manual process with an automated process in the back end. The data's always been combined. The data's always been used. The data's always, there always was this risk of making sure you have a non-disclosure agreement. And with AI in particular, this language around training of the agents is important. But a lot of the fundamentals around how the AI works are not that much different than other types of data collection services that you might engage, and making sure that those services are not sharing your data downstream with their sub-suppliers unless it's part of a processing agreement, right? Goes back to sub-processor data for things like credit card information or
Right.
PII or GDPR
Right.
requirements, right? This just puts a little extra twist on it when it comes to training AIs and what can be done with that training data, or what can be done with the pool data, that your data not be pooled with other people's data, those kinds of things.
No, correct. I think it's a very comprehensive answer, and that addresses a lot of facets to it. One thing now, changing kind of a gears, that you're a CISO, and that gives you a seat at the C-level table, but then you also had been at big organizations. So, in the evolutionary process of an organization, we are not talking about any organization that is fundamentally required to have a lot of security, but just a general business. What do you feel that, what are the stages potentially where they need to start thinking about security, and in what terms? And if they have to build an internal security kind of a department or a group, if you will, or internal security organization, what
Yeah.
could be the evolution of structure and maturity levels of that?
It depends on the business.
Yeah,
And so I'm going to give you a quick rundown of how security normally works in a business.
sure.
So in a small business, security is done by the same guy that is running your servers, that's configuring your desktops, that's troubleshooting the problem on your computer. You
Your
got one or two people.
network admin,
Right.
IT help,
Yeah, your
IT help
network
desk.
admin, your network admin and your server admin and your desktop deployment specialist and your help desk guy are the same guy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And for companies that are small enough to have like one or two people, a small handful of people in their IT department, really what they need to look at are understand what is their exposure, how much stuff are they relying on third parties for. So a lot of times companies now, if they're going to process credit cards or something, they're not setting up their own internal credit card processing. They're going to use a third party, right? So, but do they have a website? Is that website a potential target space, or is that hosted by a third party and they can leverage security onto the third party? But there are basics, like if you have remote access, right, that you have to have multi-factor authentication. If you're a small business, you can't not do
Yeah.
that. You have to have some awareness for phishing inside of your associate and contractor base, because that's still one of the most common entry points for attacks. So there's probably 10 best things that you should do as a small business to protect yourself,
Mhm.
that just kind of get the basics of making sure that you're not going to fall victim to very basic attack scenarios, right? And then as you get into larger companies, they'll a lot of times have a managed service provider that's doing their security. And what you want to make sure is that the least expensive managed service provider isn't necessarily the right managed service provider for you, because they may be looking for the least expensive way to check the boxes for security.
Yeah.
And that's not usually the best solution, right? So make sure that you've got some vetting of your managed service provider. If you have to, bring in an outside expert just to help you vet and make sure you get the right services to help you. As you get into a mid-sized company, depends. So startups a lot of times operate with a high degree of risk. And so it's important to understand where your business is on its maturity life cycle and where its risk tolerance is at that time. So there are a lot of startups that operate with a high degree of risk because their goal is to get off the ground, get their business up and running, be competitive, establish themselves in the environment.
Security is a luxury for them at that point in
Right,
time.
right. But then once they're established, now they need to keep what they have. Now security becomes really important because they don't want to lose what they have. So it kind of depends on where the business is, what its risk tolerance is. Managing a security program is making sure that the control framework you want to use for your business matches the goals and objectives of your business, right? So you're protecting the business, but you're protecting them the right way. It doesn't make any sense. For instance, this is as an example, the business says, hey, you know what? If we operate with really minimum security controls, we're going to make $10 billion next year. If we put in all the best practice security controls, we're going to make 1 billion. Yeah. I mean, so there's a financial consideration there, right? As to what's enough security that it manages risk for the business, but allows the business to achieve its objectives and goals. Right. So you always have to have that perspective. It's about the business.
Is there a corresponding, I mean, in the software development world, there's a capability maturity model that as organizations grow, they kind of do those stages. I understand there is ISO and other standards out there like
Yeah.
27001. So is there any maturity framework that companies can follow and see how their security overall as a
Sure. I mean, you brought up ISO. So from a security management practices standpoint, the three probably most common that you'll run into are the ISO 27000 framework,
yeah.
the NIST framework, or the CIS framework. Center for Internet Security has a framework that actually is when someone's getting started. That's a great framework. It's a CIS 18, but really it's like 18 categories. You have like 135 controls. Your goal as a business, whether you're looking at the ISO 27000 controls, which at one time I helped author some of those controls, or you're looking at the CIS controls, or you're looking at NIST, it's not to check every box. It's not to say, hey, I did all 147 controls in this standard. It's to say, for my business, for the level of risk I want to operate at, what things do I currently have? What things should I have? What things are things that are luxury security, right? Like, hey, someday if I get far enough down the line, I might want these. And then figure out like, hey, do I have the foundational controls in place? If I identify for myself, if I look at these and I say they have 135 controls, let's say we look down, we say 20 of these should be foundational. Do I have all 20 in place? And do I have them? If I do have them in place, are they effectively in place? Because there's a difference between.
I think that this is a very important point that instead of, and I'm a big proponent of that instead of trying to win a certificate, I mean, you may need that because that is important to get a business. It's more important that implement these controls in the letter and spirit because that's fundamental to your business. And so eventually, I mean, and that's where also organization eventually graduate from just having a knock to also SOC operations and stuff around that. Yep. So one more question. So we talk about the security, the security organization, and I mean, ever since we were kids and teens, and then there used to be a CIO and CTO, and then we started getting CISO, and then now we even talk about chief AI officer or something like that. I mean, so what is a career path in terms of a career path if somebody wants to pursue a CISO career versus a CIO career? What is the difference? I mean, is there a mental kind of a map that these guys are good, they're going to be a good CISO versus these, or I mean, something like that?
This is interesting. There are two common paths for CISO, for instance, that people take. And it's interesting because they're so different from each other in some ways. If you go into mid-sized companies and smaller, the majority of your CISOs are going to have come out of a technical background. They're people who were your server administrator, or they were an application developer, or they were coming out of the SOC or whatever, and they came up and they have a technical background. They're familiar with the technical issues. But as you get into larger companies, especially very large enterprise level companies, some companies have a concept of an executive is an executive is an executive. If you're a leader and your job is to ensure people and resources are used effectively, this goes back kind of to the GE model, right? Like you could pick up someone from any business area and put them in any other business area, and their job isn't to be an expert in that business area, it's to be an expert in leading the people of that business area. And so you do see some of that in very large corporations, where you'll see CISOs who come out of audit or other parts of IT, or even areas that are not directly in IT, HR or HR IT systems, that have not heavy tech backgrounds, but have good organizational management backgrounds. And so you do see in large corporations a fair percentage of people with that. And then the other half come out of the tech background that are similar to mid-sized and smaller companies. In mid-sized and smaller companies, you typically don't have the size of an organization, the luxury of having your leader not also be a leader in that space, or at least be knowledgeable in that space. So from a how do you get there, almost every CISO I've talked to that's coming up the technical path like I did, didn't necessarily plan on being a CISO, right? And the one thing, I love talking about this topic about career growth and career management. It's really important to me. It's something I've spoke about a lot at different conferences. As you come up a chain, you're a technologist, and you start out as an analyst, and then eventually you're an engineer, and maybe you go to an architect, and then eventually it's like an individual contributor. At some point in your career, you're going to be faced with a choice of, do I continue to be an expert at this technology? Do I continue to be like the authentication expert? Do I continue to be the network security expert? Or do I want to be involved with driving things from a managerial standpoint, where I'm going to help guide things and I'm going to serve more in a leadership role for other experts? And you face that decision. And for some people, it's a no-brainer, because they're like, hey, you know what? Managing people is like the last thing I want to do. I would rather be, stab myself in the foot than have to manage other people. And so they're going to stay on a technical path, which is okay. And some people are like, hey, I really want to lead, and I want to be a leader. I want to be a manager, because they have this concept in their head of what a manager is, and they want to be a manager. And then when they get in the role, they realize all the different things they have to deal with, and the people issues, and
they're in the people business all of a sudden.
And now they're in the people business, not a technology business. And some of those people eventually get to the point where they're like, how do I get back to technology? Because this is not for me. And if
they say individual contributor being a heaven space, I mean, I've seen it.
Right. So, and then when you do get to a people who are now you're leading some people, and you're like, hey, you know what? This isn't so bad. I'm actually making a difference. I'm helping develop other people. I'm helping drive initiatives by getting other people to help them be successful. That's when you start saying management might be for me. And you start looking at how do you move up the chain. And the thing that's most important for people to realize as they start thinking, okay, I'm a first level manager, I've got a small team, how do I get from that to a CISO? Is to recognize that each step you take in the chain, from a manager to a senior manager to a director to a CISO, or whatever that path looks like in your industry, your skills change. So I often provide an analogy to this to being on a football team, for instance. When you're a player, your job is to be on the field and play. That's what you do. And when you're a first line manager, it's more like being a captain of a team. You're still playing, but you're also doing strategic development for how to play. How do the rest of the players play their game? But eventually you become a coach. Maybe you're a special teams coach, but you don't get on the field. Like if you're the offensive coach, it doesn't matter how bad the quarterback is doing. That offensive coach never gets on the field to throw the ball, right? Because your job now is to coach. And each step up in an organization, from a special teams coach to a head coach to a general manager, the role changes. the responsibilities change, and you have to figure out what that looks like and develop your skills to match the next job you're going to have. You need to do the job you're doing well, right? That's the ground stakes for continuing to grow into the next level. But you also need to start building the skills that next level is going to require, because they are going to be different. The going from
You
line
really need to
manager, right?
remember that the next level, as soon as you move up the ladder, you become an incompetent person for that level, and you have to
Right.
relearn and become
Right.
competent again. So, I mean, you have to
Right.
get out of your comfort zone of being competent at a certain stage, and you want to move up the ladder. I mean, that's the way. No, you're
Yes.
absolutely right. Keith, you had been, I mean, you're a CISO of large organization, and I was looking at your profile. I mean, part of your group, it has automotive, it has entertainment, hospitality, and so on and so forth. Let's assume I am a startup and we're going to build a product, and or I am a professional services company who can offer you services. In the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what kind of, and you must be at your position, must be a buyer of a lot of stuff. So, what could be the skills as a professional services company, or what could be the services that you would like to see and being offered that you would like to buy, as well as if I'm a startup who's going to build a product? What are some of the opportunities out there which I should attack?
In the security space in particular,
Yeah,
or in the just across the board?
security space and across the board, whichever
I,
way you would
I,
like to answer.
I think one of the things that it's always hard from a startup perspective, because you're competing against the established providers. And as we've
Correct.
seen in the security industry, there's a lot of consolidation going on, where the large companies, when they want to innovate, they typically aren't inventing, they're buying. So they find your startup and they buy it and they bring it over. The problem is that those large companies are terrible at innovation. And so as soon as they buy this innovative company and try and shoehorn it into their corporate model, the whole thing falls apart,
Yeah.
right? In a lot of times, a lot of cases. So the advantage that a startup has is that they can truly be innovative, and they don't have the investment in legacy technologies or legacy processes. This is what holds large companies back from being able to be truly innovative in their services and products, is because they've already invested so much in some set of technology, some set of services, that it's hard picking up and switching gears, especially if they've been doing it for longer than 10 years, is difficult, right? Where startups have an opportunity to bring something truly new to the table. And I think where we're going to see that is in the AI space. There are a lot of services that in the security space, I picture there are certain things that people hate hearing this, but it's true. There are certain services that are going to replace jobs, right? It's going to happen. For instance, like I can't imagine in a few years that a level 1 SOC analyst is actually going to be a person.
Yeah.
That's to me probably going to be an AI role.
Yeah,
Any
absolutely. I second that.
anytime Right. Anytime where you're talking about analyzing large volumes of data for behavioral characteristics or behavioral patterns, AI is going to do that better than a person does.
All right.
But that means that there's going to be other roles that open. And one of the things that's important we're still at if not a grassroots, we're still at the grass level of how AI is going to interact in our environment. And there is a lot of opportunities for small companies to figure out how to leverage that technology in new ways to bring a competitive edge that I think bigger companies, although they're trying to do it, and they certainly have the money to do it, they are also towing that legacy anchor around with them that's going to make them slower at doing it. So I think that's where I see opportunity coming, and it's going to be necessary, because I guarantee the bad guys are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's entrepreneurial opportunities on both sides of the
Everywhere.
fence.
But
Right.
absolutely.
So
I agree with that. No, thank you, Keith. I think it was pretty enlightening, whatever we have discussed today. And I learned quite a few things. I'm sure the people who will be listening to this will also do that. So thank you very much for being on the show with us. Probably we can in probably 6 months have another session with you as this AI genie is slowly coming out of the bottle to see where it goes and how it works out. But I think this was all very enlightening. So thank you very much for being with us today, and I really enjoyed that.
thank you. It's been great. I've really enjoyed myself and enjoyed the conversation. I hope people find it useful.
Absolutely.